Welcome to our game today, which is the most ridiculous game you'll ever see. A game in which Frank Marshall, playing with the white pieces, played 14 pawn moves in a row, going against everything you've ever learned about chess, which was to develop your pieces, control the center, and don't push too many pawns. Marshall pushes pawn moves 14 moves in a row, and yet he completely destroys his opponent, uh, Hyman Rogosin. Well, let's see how this is the case. So we get e4 by Marcel, c5 by Rogosin, and then we get b4, which is the wing gambit in the Sicilian defense. And after takes, we get a3. We get knight c6 by Rogosin, with the idea, of course, if takes, you now get your knight out. But we get a takes b4 and giving up the pawn, but instead we get knight f6 with the idea, of course, to attack the middle pawn of the board. But then we get b5 attacking the knight. So now we get knight d4 and we get c3 attacking the knights. And then we get knight back to e6 followed by e5 attacking the other knight. So black here has got two knights out. White is pushing his pawns all over the shop, leaving lots of gaps, but he's attacking and forcing his opponent to move his knights constantly. So after knight to d5 we get, you guessed it, c4. Now the computer actually says best move here is to go here, and that would still lead to a leading position for white, but it would have saved a lot of the problems that he ended up finding, because in this position Rogozin plays knight to d4, which is a mistake, because what do you think Marshall played here? Well, you guessed it. He played g3, attacking the knight. So after g3, we get knight to g6. And in this position, what would you play if you were Marshall? Now, keep in mind, we're only 9 moves deep, and we know there's a lot more pawn pushes to come. Well, the best move here is not necessarily the best move, but it's pretty much the best move. It's f4. Now f4 of course is threatening to go f5 on the next move and forking the knights. So what Rogozin should have tried maybe was something along the lines of knight to c5 or knight to d4. Could have gone c5 and then after d4 we go knight to e4, and after f5 you're after running into a lack of squares for the black knight to escape to, so you'd have to sacrifice it. So maybe this was the thinking behind the move, because in this position we get knight takes f4. Maybe sick and tired of being pushed around by the pawns all the time. So then after g takes back we get knight takes f4. So see here we see Rogozin has taken 3 pawns. White's defense is completely destroyed. White has not developed any pieces whatsoever, and black has got 3 nice pawns and white has got a pawn and a knight. Now in this position we get d4, attacking the knight with the bishop, so we get g6. Now what do you think Marcel played in this position? Well, you guessed it, he went for a pawn move and he went for h4, of course, with the idea probably of getting another pawn move. So Rogozin plays e6, and after this, that's right, Marshall went h5, attacking the knight. Now in this position, Marshall was going to have to make a move other than a pawn move, because he was forced into it after Rogozin played bishop to b4 check. So Marshall then plays bishop to d2, and after trading off the bishops we develop the knight by Marshall. The knight still under attack by the pawn on h5 goes to e7, and then we get knight to e4, which has got this threat of jumping in and giving this check here. So we get knight to f5 protecting against this, but with this move we now get Marcel's return of h6. Now h6, of course, if you decided to go and take it, we're giving up the check here, and there's lots of interesting developments to come along. So we get g6. So what happens if you take here, knight takes, we get rook takes, and the exchange sacrifice really is a beautiful thing, because after knight to d6 check, king to e7 is the best move, because we've got queen to f3, and black is finding himself in all sorts of trouble with the exchange sacrifice. So instead g6 is played to avoid any of those tricks. So then we get knight to f6 check, king to f8, we get knight to f3. Now knight to f3 is a nice move, thinking of coming in here to g5 with the idea of capturing this pawn here with check. So we get d6, trying to blast open the position, and Marcel continues with his plan by going knight to g5, and then after d takes e5, d takes e5, we get a trade-off of the knights, or of the queens rather, but we have the danger of the rook coming in here. So we get king to e7, and after rook to h3 with the nice little idea here of doubling up, we get b6, because black understands they're in big trouble here. And here we get bishop to g2, attacking along the long diagonal, and then we get rook to b8, getting out of that. But after knight takes on h7, black actually resigns in this position, because black is in big trouble, because this pawn, or rather this knight, is protecting an escape route. So the game could have continued on. So in this position, you could end with a beautiful checkmate with something like knight takes the pawn. Then you just simply play, instead of taking, you could just go to rook to d3, and we've got a mate in 5 on the board. If you play something like rook, you have to do it to defend. You can take the rook, and then after your rook takes on h7, you take back with the knight, and this game is all over. Especially if you take the bishop, you get a simple checkmate pattern.